This episode of the WP Builds podcast is brought to you by GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. Find out more at go.me/WP Builds. And by Bluehost. Redefine your web hosting experience with Bluehost Cloud. Managed WordPress hosting that comes with lightning-fast websites, 100% network uptime, and 24/7 priority support. With Bluehost Cloud, the possibilities are out of this world. Experience it today at bluehost.com/cloud. And by Omnisend. Do you sell your stuff online? Then meet Omnisend. Yes, that Omnisend. The email and SMS tool that helps you make $73 for every dollar spent. The one that's so good, it's almost boring. Hate the excitement of roller coaster sales? Prefer a steady line going up? Try Omnisend today at omnisend.com. And by Memberful. Building a membership website? Check out Memberful. Memberful allows you to easily add gated content, private member spaces, payment collection, and more to your WordPress website. Get started for free at memberful.com/WP Builds. That's memberful.com/WP Builds. Hello there. I am joined by Joe Dolson today. How are you doing, Joe?
Oh, I'm doing great. Yourself?
Yeah, really good. This is brand new. Joe and I, actually quite a while ago, we were sitting together on a table at a restaurant outside of, it was in WordCamp Europe in Torino.
Right.
It was not that far from the venue. And we came up with the idea of this show. So this is an experiment. We're going to see how it goes. I have no idea if the tech is going to work. I've no idea exactly what Joe's going to do, what Joe's going to say. But the premise of this show is to offer up an opportunity for Joe to demonstrate his expertise. Joe, as you're about to find out, is really into web accessibility, which kind of segues nicely for me to offer you an opportunity, Joe, just to tell us who you are. So do you mind giving us your elevator pitch, who you are and so on?
Sure. So my name is Joe Dolson. I'm a website accessibility consultant, and I also do plugin development. I'm a core committer to WordPress, so I've been working on accessibility in WordPress core for about, let's just call it 12 or 13 years. I don't feel like actually looking it up right now. It's too long to think about.
Okay.
But I have focused my entire business since I started it in 2004 around the topic of website accessibility. And so I've just got a pretty significant depth of experience in that area. And so it's always an interesting thing to look at, see what people have done, see what people are doing well, people are doing less well, and just explore.
Nice. Well, so the idea of this show in particular, and we don't know if this format is going to be one that we stick with, but we thought for this opening show, we would go with the premise of finding some websites out there, and we'll demonstrate how we found those in a moment, and then picking a thing. So on each of those websites, Joe is going to poke around, ferret around in real time, and you'll get to see the tools that he's using and so on. So that might be useful. But also, you'll be able to just focus on this one particular topic. Now, a few caveats. The first thing to mention is that the websites that we have chosen have come from this place. Now, you may recognize this. This is the WordPress Showcase. And if you've not been here before, an easy way to find it is to go to wordpress.org/showcase. And it's, it's not particularly new, but it's had a bit of a refresh of late. And the intention of this website is to demonstrate websites which are using WordPress, which, well, I think it's fair to say represent good design. Let's go with that. So they might not necessarily be perfectly accessible, but I just want to point out at this opening juncture that the intention of this show is not to sort of cherry pick things and let's say mock them or poke holes in them. the idea is really we needed a repository where we could reliably find WordPress websites, and the idea would be for Joe to have an opportunity to pick some and then go through areas where they might need help. So this isn't about naming and shaming, or at least I hope that's the intention, Joe, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a big thing of what I want to be able to express from this is how common accessibility problems are. Sometimes I worry that people have the general impression that, most websites are basically accessible. And, if somebody is out picking out accessibility problems, it's something that they've really hunted down and searched out. And the reality is, 97% of the top million websites have obvious, automatically detectable accessibility issues. This is a great study by WebAIM at webaim.org. That is the million website study. And they do an enormous amount of automated testing to look at websites and say, yeah, most websites have lots and lots and lots of problems. So I just want to be able to look at a few things and say, yeah, this is common. This isn't something that a developer should be embarrassed about. It's something a developer should look at and say, I have a thing to learn. I could do this better.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a really nice way of framing it. And if you were watching, if you have the ability to watch what we're doing, I have just been scrolling through the video, and really, you can see that the caliber of websites on this showcase, it's pretty high. There's some fairly heavy hitting names out there, so they've definitely cherry picked some of the bigger players in the WordPress space, if you know what I mean. It feels like a lot of this is enterprise stuff. But what's kind of interesting, Joe, I think one of the things that we should probably say right at the outset is it definitely feels as if it's opinionated upon design. A lot of the things in here have really unique design, and maybe that's the criteria. I'm not entirely sure, but it's certainly there's something there. They all look fairly special, fairly unique. They're not made from a cookie cutting template, I don't think.
Yeah, I do think a significant part of what the team that reviews showcase submissions is looking for is unique design ideas, something that's a little out of the box. Um, and and that's definitely what they've got.
Mm.
You're not going to find you're not going to find very many WordPress core themes in here.
Let me just have a little quick look here. So we have things like category and flavors and things like that. And then we can sort. As of this moment, I could be wrong, but as of this moment, there doesn't appear to be a way to filter based upon accessibility. You never know. Maybe that's something that's going to come in the future. But
It
yeah,
has been talked about.
okay.
There is actually an open GitHub issue about adding that as a criteria and flagging sites that are accessible. But there's a pretty significant challenge in terms of the amount of time it takes to actually
Mm,
review that. And the reality is, a full accessibility audit takes hours and hours and hours, and we're not going to do that. There's simply no way it's realistic to put that much time into assessing the accessibility of these submissions. So that becomes a question of how much time is reasonable to decide that it meets some level of accessibility, which is not going to be considered any like qualified acceptance criteria for claiming accessibility. Because we
yeah,
don't want to make a legal claim for a website. Hey, this website meets all criteria, and then they don't, and that's awkward.
yeah.
So
So
it's a hard problem.
yeah, I'll move that website out of the way. And just to say, this is not therefore sort of 101 in every single thing that you could possibly think about in terms of accessibility. What Joe has decided to do is pick one thing and then show on a few websites using the tools that he's got available to him. Um, that one thing over and over again, and ways that it might be implemented on one site or a different site, and so on. So, without further ado, I'm going to raise Joe's screen there, and we've got one here on. So, your screen is divided into two parts. We've got the inspector from Chrome on the one side, and we've got the website which is called No Gucci. This is from nogucci.org, noguchi.org. You can find the website there. And what is under the microscope today, Joe? What is the thing that you're going to look at on everything we touch?
Well, the thing I decided to take a close look at here is mobile menu toggles. Because ultimately, The mobile experience is an incredibly prominent thing. It's huge for people with disabilities because phones are cheaper than computers, and the assistive technology and screen readers available on phones is just as good. So it's a
Hmm.
great way to get around a website. But of course, that also means that for almost all sites, you're dealing with a collapsed mobile menu. Um, and so I picked this because, first of all, it's a really significant issue for websites. Access to the menu is obviously a key thing to be able to get around the website. Even if every single page was perfectly accessible, if you cannot operate the menu, you're basically done. The other reason I picked it is because literally the first 6 websites I looked at all had different ways of implementing this button, and they all had some kind of a problem with it. So it
Oh,
gives
okay.
a lot of different things that I can illustrate. They're different, they're not the same problem, and they're interesting. So let's just dive in. So
Yeah.
this first one on noguchi.org. I mean, first of all, this mobile menu, obviously it has no visible label. So my first question becomes, what is in fact the label of this particular control? And so I'm going to be looking at the inspector, and I usually leave the accessibility attributes open. And so you can see down here on the bottom that it has an ARIA label that says Open Menu Mobile. I That's reasonable. It's a reasonable guess. It is kind of an odd string of text. Really, all this needs to say is menu, because what it does and how it behaves is kind of a separate issue. But it is labeled, so it has a name. That's great. However, what I also observe is that it's a link. So it's a link with, just a blank address. It's using the hash for an address.
Hmm.
Now, what that potentially means is when it's activated, it might move the focus if they haven't taken control over that, because that hash can be a reference. It's just a blank reference on the page, so it's going to move the focus to somewhere on the page. And that's because of what links do. Links are fundamentally about moving you to a new location, whereas buttons are about creating actions. This should be a button. That would be more expected and more predictable. The other reason it should be a button is that buttons have different controls than a link. Buttons open using spacebar or enter, and
Mm.
links only work on the enter key. So if somebody is wanting to use a particular pattern, if that's their habit, it might not work. Now, the next thing I would find here, I'm going to tab into this. And so I'm going to turn on something that will show you what I'm doing. Whoops, that's not the thing I wanted. Uh, this is basically just a tracker that keeps track of what key I'm pressing so that you can kind of tell what I'm doing even if things aren't visible. So I'm going to tab in and try and find the button. Right now, I'm on something that I can't see, so I don't know what that is. But I get to this menu button, and it does have a focus, and that's useful. So let's open it. So I just tried it with the space bar, just to test whether they'd added an event that handled that space bar, and it didn't work. It just shifted the focus slightly. So that's annoying, not great. But it does work with the enter key. Now I can tab forward and see where I am. And unfortunately, now I'm not seeing anything. So I have absolutely no idea where I am on the page. Um, I'm going to try and escape this menu to see what I'm doing, but escape doesn't close it. So
So
right
just to
now
be
I'm
clear,
lost.
these would be you're using tab, space, escape. These, and in your case,
Yeah,
enter
this
as well.
is the experience
This is
that
the
basically
normal, right?
anybody who's using a keyboard will have if they're not using a screen reader.
Okay.
Now, a screen reader is going to give you a bit more feedback. This is more the experience of somebody who's sighted, and I'm doing that because, in all honesty, trying to do a audio recorded event live with a screen reader is challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't want Nathan to have to spend the next month and a half in editing. Um, so you're going to get the keyboard, but this is a real experience. I mean, people do navigate using a keyboard from a mobile device. This is a very real thing that most people tend to ignore. And one of the keys about accessibility is that when somebody says, navigating with a keyboard on a mobile device, the people tend to seize on the idea that that is a sole way of functioning. And what we're talking about is the kind of mythical keyboard only user. But that's not a real thing. What is real is that people use a wide variety of mixes of interactive methods.
Mm,
And the fact is, whatever they are using at any given moment should work. You shouldn't be obligated to switch from your keyboard to a pointing device because this control only works from a pointing device.
right, right.
Because when you're imagining a user like somebody who has very limited mobility, who's using, a breath-controlled puff and sip device, the effort to switch between one type of controller and
Mm,
another is extremely high. That barrier is big. They should be able to stay on what they're using as long as they possibly can.
mm, okay.
At any
Thank
rate,
you.
what we've just seen here is that the biggest problem here is that once you've activated this menu, your location is lost. You don't really know where you are until you finally get to this close button. But in the meantime, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know what will happen. And I just hit enter on something. I don't know what it was, and I don't know what it did. So honestly, I have literally no idea what was going on with that menu. It would require a fair amount of effort to explore it and find the real details. Suffice it to say, it's a challenge.
Okay,
So
okay.
I'm going to just go ahead and pop open another one so
So
that we can.
again, we're going to look at another website from the showcase. In this case, by the way, all of the links will be buried in the show notes, which you can find at wpbuilds.com. This is quebec.ubisoft.com. That's the URL. And okay, off we go again.
Oh, this is much the same thing. We've got another mobile menu toggle. Again, it has no visible label, so I'm immediately curious whether it has an accessible name. And in this case, it does not. In fact, what this is just, it's a div. It has a couple of spans in it that are styled to look like lines, so it's not even using a character that could conceivably have some kind of Unicode naming. Uh, that's pretty much a bad sign. The fact that it's a div and doesn't have any accessible name, it means it basically doesn't exist for most screen reader users or keyboard users. But let's just see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the pressed key monitor so that my keyboard navigation isn't completely an illusion. Okay, I've got to focus on the business name and on jobs, and then I have jumped into Discover
Oh,
Our Culture. So this, as pretty much I expected from the fact that it was a div without any kind of tab index attribute, I was unable to get to the menu. So in this case, this would be very difficult. I do know that a very, very experienced screen reader user, by navigating using arrow keys and arrowing through the text, might be able to get to that control and then activate it. But the average user is simply not going to find this.
okay.
And in this
Okay.
case, whether this control loses your focus or not is somewhat irrelevant because you can't get keyboard focus to it in the first place. Therefore, there's no reasonable way you could worry about whether you're going to lose focus. So this is always one of those issues in testing a website where I'm like, because you have this problem, I can't realistically test this other problem. I'm going to warn you about it, but there is no situation in which I can actually trigger it.
Right, right.
So I
Okay.
feel like that one, it's pretty much a quick summary of exactly what that is doing. There's not a lot to say. It doesn't work.
Okay, that was quebec.ubisoft.com. We're now going to design museum, spelled as you'd imagine, .dk. Designmuseum.dk. Okay. Remove the inevitable cookie banner.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. Okay.
So this one, it's the same presentation to start. Now we've got 3 lines. This one's an SVG. Now an SVG is an element that can take a name. This one does not, however, have one. It would have required a title attribute, a title element that could receive that name and some aria. So this is at least, it's hypothetically more practical to name this one with just the element you've got there. However, I see that it looks like they have not. And again, this is a div, so it's going to have an event attached to it. It does not appear to have any keyboard focus, and it does not appear to have any name. This is a great thing in the inspector. It can give you all of these accessibility properties. So like from the name, it's going to be using the accessibility tree to calculate what the accessible name of the element is. It'll even tell you where it's from, but this has no title, no aria label, no aria labeled by, and no contained text. So effectively, it has no name.
Okay.
So that's a little frustrating. I'll also note, and I failed to mention this on the previous items, that what this also isn't informing you about is whether or not it's open or closed.
Right. Right.
So when I open this menu, in theory, the control that you get to should have an aria-expanded attribute that indicates whether or not it's open or closed. Again, since this control can't be reached using the keyboard, it's a little bit irrelevant. I will quickly test and see whether they've added any kind of handling to be able to get to it on this case. I'm doubting it because I don't see a tab index attribute, and so it's fairly unlikely. And indeed, I see nothing at all happening
Wow.
on this website.
No.
There is, oh, I reached the skip to content link. That comes into focus, but unfortunately, it does not appear that anything else has a focus state on this page, though there are clearly things that I can tab to. So that's going to be a pretty frustrating experience for anybody trying to navigate using a keyboard. I do have 2 more sites to take a look at.
Okie doke.
So let's go ahead and just take a
Okay.
look at those and see what we've got.
I'll quickly tell everybody what this one is. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I'm just going to say tetuhi.art. So it's spelled Tetuhi.art, A-R-T. And, oh, interesting.
And that one started off with some fun animation, which that might have been fine. I don't, at the moment, have prefers reduced motion turned on my machine. I turn that off and on pretty regularly because I'm in the process of testing. So I don't know whether that was respecting it. Animated text can be very strange for a screen reader. I did review a site yesterday that had an animated H1 heading nested in a slider.
Okay.
So the main heading of the page changed every few seconds, which I will tell you that the screen reader I was working with found that to be a bit confusing.
Yeah, I'll bet.
But this menu, at least, I'm looking at it, and it actually has a visible label, so that's great. That means if you're using like voice command, you're going to activate this by saying something like, click menu, which is great if it's actually named that, which is something to check. And in fact, it is not named menu.
Oh, okay.
So here's where it gets a little bit interesting. So there's a WCAG principle that's called label in name. This does pass that because the word that's visible is menu, and the actual label is coming from this aria label attribute that says open the menu. The problem here, of course, is label in name just means it's present. The way voice command frequently works is it's expecting the visible information to be at the beginning of the accessible name. This is highly variable. Some voice command tools, you have to speak the entire name, so even you may not be able to see it, but you need to use the entire thing. So that can be a little bit frustrating when those don't match. I would also argue that it's unnecessary. There are other ways of indicating whether or not you're going to be opening or closing. That's where that aria-expanded attribute comes into play, is that it tells you whether it's open or closed, so you don't really need to use that in the name. It's just part of the state of that control. What I'm also noticing here is that this is another link element. It's an anchor. This one does not have an href attribute. So That does mean it's not going to trigger a strange shift in the page,
Okay.
but it also means that you can't focus it with the keyboard
Okay.
because the anchor element is not a link. The A element means this is an anchor. If it has an href attribute, that means it's an anchor that points to somewhere and is therefore a link. If it does not have an href attribute, it's a target. It's something that a link can point to.
Toward, yeah, yeah.
And that's usually done using an ID attribute.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
However, since it doesn't have an href, it actually is something that can't receive keyboard focus. So let's go ahead and turn on our pressed keys again and just kind of dive in and see what we can do. And I'm tabbing and I'm tabbing. I'm not seeing any focus. Now, a lack of visible focus doesn't necessarily mean that it's not there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable its focus state to see whether it has a focus state. And it does not. So in the inspector, what I just did is I selected the interactive element, the anchor, and I forced its focus state. But it didn't change anything. So what I know from that is that in my tabbing, I really truly did not reach this item, which is what I expected since it doesn't have a tab index or an href attribute. So you can see that they've clearly made some effort to try and do some accessibility. They have an ARIA label, they have visible text, and nonetheless, what you've ended up with is a menu toggle that cannot be accessed in any way. So one more.
Okay, last but by no
This is
means
the
least.
last one.
This is fabricagroup.fr. So FABBRICA group, GROUP, all as one word, .fr. We had a fair bit of animation going on there, didn't we, at the page load?
Yeah, this one was a little bit simpler. It was pretty much all graphic animation and not text. I'd generally be less concerned. It's essentially a loading screen. And it was fast enough that it probably doesn't need to be expressed. Of course, I'm on a pretty fast connection.
Okay.
So here we go. Once again, no visible label. I will inspect that. Okay, this one's actually a button.
Nice.
Yay.
Okay.
This one has an ARIA label that says menu. Great. So that's a wonderful thing. So now I'm expecting this to work. I do not see an aria-expanded state right now. That's not necessarily evidence that it's not going to inform you of this. It could be added only when it's active, though
Right.
that would be an error because right now it does not communicate to you whether that it's closed. So aria expanded equals false would tell you this is not currently expanded. So that's something I'm gambling is likely to end up being a problem. So let's just tab through, see what we're doing here. Well, that's a little disconcerting. I tabbed to this Instagram link and to the title, and I have skipped, apparently, the button. Now, I know as a button, it pretty much has to be focusable. So what that probably means is it doesn't have a visible focus state. So I think I'm on it right now as the thing to the left of the title. I'm correct? I was. Now, the lack of a focus state is going to be a problem, obviously, for sighted people using a keyboard. It's a little bit frustrating. It's a little unnerving to jump past things and without knowing that you did it. So let's see what happens now that we're in the menu. I'm still navigating the header stuff. So it's visible, though, so that's okay.
Yeah, okay.
That's honestly a problem. But then the next thing I can see from the monitor of the current link that's down in the bottom left corner that I am on a link to Montmartre. So I think that I'm in the menu and where I'm supposed to be. And the next one is Terns. So yeah,
looks
I'm
like
in
you
the
are.
menu, but continuing, I don't have a focus state. So there's nothing here that helps me easily see where I am. I'm having to use a reference that's really fairly technical and down in the far left corner. Particularly for somebody who's low vision, you usually can't possibly see that piece of information. So this would still be a somewhat frustrating experience. However, it's at least possible. You can get to these things and the information is there. This is going to be a much better experience for somebody who is using a screen reader because those focus issues won't be relevant, though they will have a difficult time telling whether the menu's open or closed. let's see if it closes with the escape key. It does not.
Oh,
So in order to close out of this, you do have to go backwards and find that close button again, which since it's not, doesn't have a focus state, it's a little hard to say, ooh, I just got lost. I guess I just got lost, and I'm not sure why that happened, but Shift Tab did not take me through what I expected it to. I'm now wondering whether I was not actually in the menu and whether those
oh,
are circumstantially also the same links that are on the page. It is. Ooh, God, ooh,
oh,
wow, that was
goodness.
some
Wow. What
animation.
happened there?
Whew. I did not like that. Anyway, so yeah, in fact, I was not in the menu at all. It's just coincidentally, the content on this page is the same as what would be in the menu. Let's
Oh,
see
I
if this.
see. Right. Okay. So
So
there's, yeah.
it
Okay. Okay.
seemed like I was, but once I started to navigate around to try and leave the menu and discovered I was not in the right place, I now knew I'm not actually here. I'm somewhere else on the page.
Okay.
So this
Oh,
is a menu that opened, concealed the whole page, but didn't place your focus into the menu itself. What that probably means is that this menu is not in the DOM order where it appears. The mobile menu is probably like tucked at the very end of the document object, and then it just is made visible. Uh, whereas the expectation when you toggle something and then tab is that that should be the next object in the document. So it should actually be located right after the control that triggers it. And then that focus happens automatically. There's no concerns. Nothing has to be done. So anyway, that was an example of just running through 5 sites. They all have beautiful designs, but they also all have mobile menu controls and mobile menus that exhibit some fairly significant problems that are frankly quite readily solvable.
I think, firstly, I've just removed the screen, so it's just me and you again, Joe. That was really interesting. So, firstly, I will put all of the links to the Chrome extension that you used and the 5 websites plus the showcase itself. I'll put those into the show notes so that they're nice and easy to find. I think maybe I've got an intuition about what we could do on the next one,
Oh,
which
great.
might be to demonstrate a fine example of a mobile menu. That might be a nice light and shade kind of
Yeah, yeah.
contrast between one and
How
the
to do
other.
it right.
Yeah, and demonstrate all of the different bits and pieces because we probably spent what 3 minutes unpacking each of those websites, and I suspect
Yeah,
we could
somewhere
probably
around there.
spend 20 minutes or so on finding a really nice example of something which captures exactly what we just we're trying to see there, but does
Indeed.
it in a really nice way. So I think that's a wrap for our first one. Hopefully that was
All right.
useful. Give you some intuition of ways that you can how to describe it muck up, not correctly configure your mobile menu and some of the pitfalls that you might fall into. Um, is there anything else you wanted to add before I click the stop button, Joe?
Well, I just want to thank people for watching, and I hope that they found that useful.
Yeah.
And, if you've made those mistakes, it's okay. People make mistakes, and that's how we learn.
Where can we reach out to you, Joe, if people want to actually communicate directly with you?
Well, you can find me on the WordPress Slack at Joe Dolson. You can find me on Twitter/X as Joe Dolson. You can find me on Mastodon. Uh, my handle is Joe Dolson. I don't
Yeah, but
remember the name
which
of my
instance
server.
is it? Yeah. Yeah.
um, but in general, Joe Dolson, no spaces, all lowercase, is my username on pretty much everything, and that's where you can find me.
My little trick when I'm using things like Google is to write the name of the person and then add a space and then just type WP. And it always seems to then isolate it to the correct, in this case, Joe Dolson. So that would be my trick.
Indeed. Well,
Honestly,
there
that
aren't a
was
lot of Joe Dolsons, so
no,
it's
okay.
pretty
Yeah,
effective.
I'm in that lucky band as well. There's very few Nathan Wrigleys as well. Well, Joe, thank you for sharing your insights today, and hopefully we'll catch up with you on another episode in the near future where we'll rectify it and discuss the ways that maybe it could be done,
Indeed.
air quotes, better. Thank you so much, Joe.
Alrighty, thank you.